Joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. Happy New Year, Senator. I hope you are turning in early tonight, not one of those late night people.
Happy New Year, Hugh, to you and all of your listeners. Now, I probably will not be ringing in the new year, but I'm looking forward to a great new year back up in Washington once we have Republicans in control of the Congress and President Trump back in the White House.
And I agree. And it will be a year that Ohio State beats the Ducks tomorrow. You are watching that game, are you not?
Oh, of course, with bated breath, Hugh.
I just wanted to confirm that. Senator, I want to do something that requires delicacy and diplomacy, and then I want to dive into what Donald Trump wants to aim to. Jimmy Carter died. I went along with the nice man, Home for Habitat for Humanity story for a day and a half. President Trump was very gracious. Then Joe Biden used his truncated eulogy to attack Donald Trump. And then we saw some hagiography about Jimmy Carter's post-presidency, in which he engaged in repeated anti-Semitic acts, anti-Israel acts, and interfered with nuclear diplomacy in Korea. What do you make? How ought we to be remembering Jimmy Carter appropriately?
Well, Hugh, first I want to offer, on behalf of all our Kansans, our prayers for the Carter family and all of his friends. And what a life one lives if you make it to the century mark. I saw news that Babe Ruth hit 430 home runs during Jimmy Carter's life, which is more than the active leader in home runs has in Major League Baseball today, to give you a sense of what he lived through and what he saw. And he was a man that served his country first in the Navy and then as governor and then as president. All that said, as you put it, Hugh, when you put up everything on the ledger of his presidency and post-presidency, you have to find it quite wanting. In his presidency, he did help negotiate the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, which stands to this day. But weakness abroad invited Russian adventurism everywhere, from Latin America to Africa, and most notoriously in Afghanistan, probably most dangerously, and what we're still living with the consequences of today. He helped bring the Ayatollahs to power by abandoning the Shah in Iran. All of these things, of course, paved the way electorally for Ronald Reagan to win in a landslide in 1980. But Hugh, I have to say, in his post-presidency, he may have been even worse, at least when it comes to America's standing in the world. As you mentioned, he became something of a virulent anti-Israel activist, writing a book calling Israel an apartheid state. Don't forget that he tried to lobby Arab nations against joining George Bush 41's coalition to eject Iraq after its
I had forgotten that. Good point.
Kuwait.
Yep.
And as you say, he meddled in President Clinton's efforts to stop North Korea's nuclear program, the consequences of which we're still living with today. So, yes, Jimmy Carter was a good Christian man who always tried to live up to Christian ideals, probably better than most of us do, worked with charities like Habitat for Humanity, but his foreign policy as president and his incessant and usually anti-American meddling in foreign policy during his post-presidency is going to be a major part of his legacy.
The one thing I want people to know as we go through the next 9 days in the state funeral, as is appropriate, he will have his state funeral at the Washington Cathedral, is what his comment to Piers Morgan was. I believe it is our cut number 12. Piers Morgan, after the appearance of the book Palestine, Peace Over Apartheid. Let's play this.
Can any deal be done that doesn't involve sitting across a table with Hamas?
I've met several times with Hamas leadership, and I think they are willing to accept Israel to exist peacefully within the 67 borders or some modification of those borders.
So, Senator Cotton, the 1967 borders have never been on the table. Hamas has never not called for the destruction of Israel in its charter, and he met several times with Hania and others. That, I think, underscores his vast naivete about the world.
Yeah, Hugh, I mean, and it wasn't just Hamas. He basically, as I mentioned earlier, would coddle and try to legitimize every anti-Israel leader throughout the Middle East in his post-presidency, many of whom have now been killed since they've been waging war against Israel, especially over the last 16 months. And to go back to the point about the borders, the so-called 1967 borders, that is a death knell for Israel. The so-called 1967 borders are totally indefensible. That's why Israel's enemies launched wars against them in 1967 and 1973 because they thought they had the strategic initiative, which Israel now has. And all of those enemies, like Hamas and others that Jimmy Carter trucked with in his post-presidency, they reject the so-called two-state solution, Hugh. They want a one-state solution. Their solution is to eliminate Jews from the Holy Land and to control all of the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. And until that changes, there's never going to be any kind of peace agreement along the lines of what Jimmy Carter or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton have pushed for 50 years.
Senator Cotton, I want to turn to your jobs in the second Trump administration. You are going to be chairman of the Senate Republican Conference, the third-ranking Republican, and the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, replacing Marco Rubio, who is going to state. This bodes well for the relationship between the Department of State and Senator Cotton and the Intel Committee. Let me ask you, who is the new member of the Intel Committee replacing Rubio?
Well, Todd Young has joined the committee because we had an extra seat we gained by going from the minority to the majority. Senator Rubio will remain on the committee, though not chairman, for the first couple weeks of January. I suspect it won't be that long before you confirm him. And then Senator Thune will make the announcement of who's going to join Todd Young as the new member on the committee after Senator Rubio resigns from the Senate. And I won't get ahead of what Senator Thune is going to decide and announce on that.
Very good. Now, I want to go to President Biden. I have already pointed out that his comments about President Carter in the Bahamas were aimed at Trump. Decency, decency, decency. But I think we are beginning to see even the media recognize that the great cover-up engineered by Team Biden to obscure the president's mental infirmity and his mental impairment is falling apart. That said, yesterday they gloated about the fact he had passed the total number of judges that Donald Trump did. That's because of a deal that Leader McConnell did that allowed the Democrats to appoint 12 Democratic judges at the district court level in exchange for not pushing forward with 5 circuit court judges, one of whom withdrew their retirement. So I would make that deal every day. Senator, would you? 4 circuits for 12 district courts?
A few observations about this, Hugh. I guess Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer can get all excited, spiking the football, that they got one more judge confirmed than did Donald Trump in his first term. But I have to ask them, they do realize what's about to happen, correct? On January 20th. I mean, I can confidently predict that Donald Trump will go into presidential retirement having appointed many more judges than Joe Biden will. I can confidently predict that. Second, as you point out, they have many more district judge, the trial judge nominees. Those are very important. Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer ushered in a lot of left-wing ideologues onto the district courts. I am saddened for the people of states like California and Illinois and New York that they're going to have to deal with all those ideologues on the district courts. But district judges do not make precedent. They do not bind their peers or any other courts in the land. That's in contrast, as you say, to the courts of appeals, where Donald Trump's record is stronger with more judges appointed. Those are the second most important courts after the Supreme Court. Furthermore, if you look at the judges that Donald Trump appointed versus Joe Biden appointed, Donald Trump appointed many more judges that were filling previously held by democratically appointed judges than Joe Biden appointed judges that were replacing Republican appointed judges. So the shift in the Court of Appeals is much more significant for President Trump than it has been for Joe Biden.
And this explains
that's only going to continue.
Senator, for the numbers for our audience, the record for the number of judges appointed by a president is 383. It's held by Ronald Reagan. That's 149 ahead of the 234 judges that Donald Trump got confirmed in his term. However, already Donald Trump has 54 confirmed judges on the courts of appeal and 3 on the Supreme Court. He's had the most dramatic effect on the Supreme Court of anyone in my lifetime. I want people to understand that Joe Biden is once again misleading people about the importance of his legacy. In fact, district court judges are important, don't get me wrong. I've appeared in front of a number of them. They're my friend. In fact, there's an opening in the Northern District of Ohio. You're not the chair of Judiciary, but if you want to nudge Chuck Grassley to say Hewitt would like to go back to Ohio and be Judge Hewitt, the second Judge Hewitt, that's fine by me. But I'm not looking for the First Circuit seat.
Hugh, not to be too blunt about it, but I think you aged down of the federal judiciary about 25 years ago.
I did, but I'm talking. It's Ohio. I'll go for 20 years. But no one wants that job anyway. There are 2 Republican senators. I know Bernie and I know J.D. Vance, and I will know whoever is appointed by Mike DeWine. I'm just saying it's Ohio, district court judge. I'm not asking for the First Circuit vacancy in Maine. That's you got to hire a 40-year-old for that. Let me ask you, Senator, when we discussed this yesterday, when people bring up constitutional amendments, there's only one I would support, and that reads, any president, vice, excepting those currently serving, any president, vice president, or justice of the Supreme Court, associate or chief, shall not serve beyond the age of 80. Do you think that Supreme Court, that constitutional amendment could pass?
Hugh, I would want to give it more consideration and have it aired and debated well. I'm generally hesitant about constitutional amendments. I think we have a pretty good Constitution as it was drafted by our founding fathers. I think if we did a better job of following it, we would be better off as a country. And as President Trump has often said, age is a proxy for ability, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And I've seen that in the Senate over the years. I've seen people well into their 80s who are still sharp as a tack and working.
Well, you work with Chuck Grassley. You work with a 91-year-old super smart guy.
Is a perfectly good example of that, who still challenged me to push-up contests.
Yeah, that's.
But I've also known people who are much younger than that, or as President Trump always liked to say, Bernie Marcus until he passed away. I mean, Bernie Marcus was well into his 90s, and Bernie was still whip smart, extremely capable, very active in his charitable work and his political work. So even an amendment like that is simple and straightforward, I think it would deserve debate and full airing before we make a decision like that, which would, in effect, take a decision out of the hands of the people every 4 years. But if that's something they debated and aired and passed through the Congress and the legislatures, then that would be their decision to make.
I might also add to that the Supreme Court number shall remain fixed at 9. Senator, if I can, I've got to go to break, but I want to ask you one more question. So if you can hold for a second while we let our affiliates down the road go off. I want to ask you about what the legacy that President Trump ought to be aiming for is. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back. I am back with Senator Tom Cotton because he's on armed services, and I wanted to ask him about the legacy goals that Donald Trump should aim for. Senator, he's already got a great legacy on the economy, on judges. He will build the wall. He will deregulate. I want to talk about the Navy. And I want to quote from the CSIS study from this year. China now possesses the world's largest maritime fighting force, operating 234 warships to the U.S. Navy's 219. Now that's warships. Those are people that can deliver lethal blows. Do you think we need to break the one-third Pentagon budget and throw a lot at the Navy, and will Donald Trump do that?
I think we have to relook at all of the Pentagon budget, Hugh, and make sure that it's geared towards our biggest threat in the world, China. Some of that's going to require more shipbuilding. It's also going to require more aircraft, more munitions, more investment in space, which has become a frontier of the battle against China and Russia, for that matter, and also basic manufacturing and the need to produce more munitions to deter those adversaries. We're also, I need to point out, as you often do, in the middle of recapitalizing our nuclear arsenal, which is fundamental to our existence as a nation, given the threat that Russia and increasingly China poses. And there should be no sacred cows when we go through that budget evaluation, and it should be based on what's necessary to protect our nation and to prevent a major war, not on parochial considerations, as it too often is, both in the Pentagon and in the Congress.
So, last question, Senator. Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, Bridge Colby, Undersecretary of Defense. I'm not sure who's going to PPO at State. The big thinkers. They are all navalists, even though Mike Waltz was a Green Beret and an Army guy. The big iron grip on the Pentagon is turnover at Secretary of the Navy. There have been so many of them, and at CNO, and they always change their mind, and we don't have a plan. Is this going to settle under the new SecDef, SecNavy, and Bridge Colby, and all the other people like Mike Waltz who are entering, who are hawks?
Yeah, I hope so, Hugh. I hope you have stability and durability in the senior leadership at the Pentagon. Because frankly, a lot of these problems can't be solved in 4 years. I mean, that's one of the lessons that Bob Gates writes about in his memoirs about his time in government service. You can make progress on the biggest ones, but it takes at least 4 years. And I know Pete Hegseth and John Phelan, the nominee to be Secretary of the Navy, understand what a rough state the Navy is in and what a rough state our shipbuilding is in, and how both of those are absolutely vital to deterring a major war with China, most likely over Taiwan. So I'm looking forward to the Trump administration getting in office, working with Republicans in the Congress, and in 4 years having our military on a much better footing to deter any war with China from happening.
I'm looking forward to reading your new book, Seven Things You Can't Say About China, which hasn't arrived yet. I have not gotten a pre-publication, just saying. Is one of those 7 things that they have the largest Navy in the world?
One of the 7 things that China is preparing for war. A second thing is China could win that war, again, most likely over Taiwan. So if you want to know the truth about China's military buildup and their intentions, you can get 7 Things You Can't Say About China. There's 2 chapters solely dedicated to China's military buildup and the threat of war with China, in addition to China's economic world war and what China has done to infiltrate America, infiltrate our governments, our companies, our media, our universities. If you're worried about the threat of China, as I know so many are in your audience, you should go out and pre-order a copy of 7 Things You Can't Say About China.
Use your gift cards, America.
Your pre-publication will come out soon.
I'm just wondering about that because I normally get the pre-publication. 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Go to Amazon. Use your gift card wisely. Senator Cotton, a happy new year to you and all the Cottons. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Hugh. Happy New Year.